thank you to everyone for coming this morning. I'm Corrine Whitaker, for those of you who don't know me. This is Karen Rogers and Lori Anderson. We're all residents of Sherborn and parents of children at the regional campus. We're hosting this presentation this morning and this evening, again at 7 o'clock, to raise awareness about the cell tower scheduled to be approved by the Regional School Committee at their October 7th meeting, and to raise all of our awareness about the potential health effects from this type of radiation. And with that, I'll ask you to please welcome Ray Peeler.
So it came on my radar screen just a few months ago that there was a cell tower that was going to be placed next to the Dover-Sherborn school, and I've been studying cell tower radiation and the issue of wireless radiation for almost 20 years now. I first started measuring EMFs when I learned about power lines. You know, there was a lot of controversy back in the late 80s and early 90s about power lines and whether large power lines could have adverse health effects for folks who are living nearby, particularly large power lines. But the real issue in this time is not the power lines, because the power line radiation doesn't really carry very far. It usually only carries a couple hundred feet, whereas wireless radiation carries as far as, you know, it carries miles potentially from different transmitters. And it's particularly important that we look into this because the areas right near these towers, the radiation levels will be extremely high. So the gist of what we're going to get to today is that there are appropriate and there are inappropriate places to put cell towers. And the safest way to do it would be to keep them basically as far away from schools and public places and places like that as you could. But in order to get to that, I think we need to take a look at the evidence that's there. So I've been measuring radiation for 20 years. I spent countless hours looking into this. I mean, really, it adds up, thousands of hours at this point. I've looked through the science. I've spoken with the actual scientists, and that's really a fascinating thing to do. I've spoken with scientists from the EPA who have been at this for 20 or 30 years. And I can tell you, I mean, there's a lot of complexity. This is a very, very complex issue when you get into it. But my job is to try to make it as simple as I possibly can. Try to take, you know, a real head full of information and make it something that's easy to grasp. I'm electrosensitive, and what that means is I'm immediately affected by wireless radiation. I didn't know this, you know, until the years went on. I first realized it when I was using a cell phone, and I had a burning sensation on the same side of the face. And I was like, you know, I downplayed it, right? Everybody would downplay it. I said, I know this is probably just something silly. This couldn't be harmful. But eventually I just realized that this was not feeling good. This actually left a painful experience for me for the next half hour or hour afterwards. And I thought, okay, this is probably not the smartest thing for me to be doing. And gradually I realized that when I went by a cell tower, or when I was in a room with Wi-Fi, or if I was using a device or something, I had the same symptoms in every situation. Which is, for me, it's you know, I get nausea, I have heart palpitations and things like that, and you'll see that it's not that uncommon these days. In the last year or two, I testified before the Vermont State Legislature on smart meter emissions. I went head-to-head with one of the top industry representatives and showed that they were falsifying information before the public. And you know, my job really is just to help people realize, to connect the dots between this kind of radiation and their health, because the information is not so easy to get to in today's society. When most of us think about cell phones, you know, we don't really know whether or not they're harmful. You know, we see one study that says that they're harmful. We'll see another study that says that they're not harmful, and it really leaves a gray area in our minds. You know, we don't really know one way or the other. Well, to start to get into it, you know, in 2011, the World Health Organization classified RF radiation, which is wireless radiation, as a class 2B possible carcinogen. Now, possible carcinogen doesn't sound that bad in today's society, right? I mean, we're all, at this point, we're all become a little bit desensitized to the idea of cancer. But there are a lot of really, really serious things that are in that same category, such as DDT, lead, a bunch of long and nasty-looking chemicals that you obviously wouldn't want to spend a lot of time around. But for some reason, this announcement really didn't make it into our media. It really didn't get very far in terms of public awareness. And I think that's largely because of how popular technology is. It's not like if it was something like phenobarbital, I think it would be much easier for us to say, okay, let's try to keep that out of our lives than it is for something that's so useful and so popular. Now, I want to get into this. Some of this is going to be pretty detailed, but you guys should know what this is. So I'm going to get into some of the actual science right off the bat. These are some of the studies that led the World Health Organization to its classification of a 2B carcinogen. And one of the studies is industry funded on the right. The other study was independently funded. This is the first one. The first one is the Interphone project. This was the largest cell phone research project to date. This was industry funded. They looked at many different countries, mainly across Europe. And they found that the official conclusion was that cell phone use led to a reduction in brain cancer use. So cell phones actually protected you from brain cancer. And that's what made it out to the public. And this was based on a regular user who made at least one cell phone call a week for at least 6 months. This was the largest cell phone study in the world. However, when you went into the data, I mean, most of their data was looking at short-term use. It's an industry-funded study. That's one of the things that you would want to do if you want to downplay the results, is you want to look at less than 4 years. But they found that, if you started to use one more heavily, which is at least an hour a day for 4 years or so, this anomaly appeared. This heavy increase in brain cancer, and this is for glioma, which is one of the most serious types of brain cancer. So the idea here is that if you use a cell phone over 640 hours in your lifetime, you start to have an increased risk. And this is for a different type of brain tumor, which is an acoustic neuroma. Very similar. It was a two to three times greater risk after this period of time. But again, the public was told that there was overall no increased risk, and that we really couldn't come to any kind of causal interpretation of this. But eventually, after some pressure, they said that okay, there might be a little bit of a risk here. However, the public wasn't told anything. Just led to sort of a confused point. And one of the things you want to understand when it comes to research is that if you follow the money, you're really going to find what the result will be ahead of time. I mean, most of the non-industry studies are going to find harmful effects. Most of the industry studies will not find harmful effects. So it's a question of who do you want to listen to. This is really sort of like the end result of it, but it's something you need to be aware of along the way. We're dealing with one of the biggest industries on planet Earth. I mean, it's bigger than the pharmaceutical industry. They have more lobbying power than pretty much anything else out there. And they're employing the same tactics that other industries used before, which is, and one of the most powerful ones is to just create a little bit of confusion. Because if you're feeling a bit confused, maybe you won't take action, and you'll just keep doing what you're doing for the time being. Now, the other research that went into the World Health Organization classification was independent research, very high-quality independent research from Scandinavia. And they have many different studies that they've published. This is pretty much the most general one, which is that after 1,000 hours of use, you start to see an increase, and then it grows with every 100 hours of use. So after 10 years or more, adults have an increased risk of about 2 to 3 times. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's going to drop over from a brain tumor. Not at all. What that means is more like the risk goes from 1 in 100,000 to more like 1 in 30,000. Okay, so that's another reason why we might not be seeing the effects culturally. But for children, the research shows that they're much more sensitive. That the risk is much higher. And the same Scandinavian researchers found that for somebody under the age of 20, in just 1 year of cell phone use, they had a 700% increase. So there's definite reasons for this. Their skulls are thinner. There's higher conductivity of brain tissue because they have higher water content. And you can see across the bottom, for an adult on the right, there's a 25% penetration, but as the child, for a 10-year-old, it's more than half, and for a 5-year-old child, it's almost the whole way through the brain. In 2011, the Italian Supreme Court ruled that cell phones do cause cancer. I don't know how many of you heard about that. Anyone? 1, 2. Okay. This was downplayed. The reason they came to that conclusion was they threw out industry-funded research. They said if there was a clear flaw in the research, they weren't even going to include it. Now, since 2011, the research has continued to compile, and high-level scientists are saying that based on the research at that time, 2013, RF radiation, wireless radiation, should be elevated. It should be elevated to a class 2A probable carcinogen. This is a particular scientist, Dr. Anthony Miller of Canada. He's a professor emeritus of School of Public Health. And then later on in 2013, the top cell phone scientist, Lennart Ardell, showed that based on current research, cell phone radiation should be classified as a class 1 carcinogen. So the same thing as the worst of the worst toxins. But on the other side of this, I mean, look, there's more cell phones than there are people in the United States, right? Mm. So it's a really unusual situation we're dealing with. This is the fastest growing technology pretty much ever. Right? Just a matter of 10 or 15 years. We've gone from hardly anybody having one to people carrying around at least one. And we see a lot more of this. The iPhone's selling out within a weekend. Massive popularity for this. And in some countries, I mean, you can't even. They have to close the doors because of as much interest to theirs. And as we look around, we all know what this looks like, right? I mean, there's more and more. These devices are sort of taking over. There's an addiction level to them that's hard to deny, and it's definitely becoming part of our culture. So one of the clearest issues is that that's come up in the last few years is that women who are using their cell phones and keeping them on their body are developing breast cancer, developing cancer in the exact same location as where they kept their phones. Now, this shouldn't be happening if cell phones were safe, right? And these are oncologists and surgeons who are saying, well, this is a very strange pattern of cancer that happens to be in exactly the same location. And that's the same thing that happened for some of the earliest cell phone cancer, brain cancer, sorry. They found the exact same side of the head, exact same areas the cell phone was being used, that there was cancer in this strange place. So what are the safety guidelines? What's here to protect us? Well, the EPA has absolutely nothing in place to protect us from wireless radiation. The FDA has no involvement whatsoever either, which leaves us with the FCC. This is our only federal agency that's involved at all in terms of our health. Now, if you look at the FCC site, this is what they're up to. They're promoting competition, innovation, and investment in broadband services. Basically, their job is to expand wireless. They're not a health agency. They never have been. They don't have any health experts on staff. They have an inherent conflict of interest in that their primary agenda is to roll out wireless technology. And they receive billions of dollars each year whenever they auction off airwaves. So if you really get down to the nitty-gritty of what our safety guidelines are, they're based on a concept that was introduced to the FCC from another group called the IEEE, which is basically the industry. And the concept is that the only scientific effect, the only effect that they consider is heating. Can the technology, can the radiation heat your body? And so the safety guidelines are based just simply on that. If it could heat your body, maybe it could be harmful. And this is very convenient for the industry because that's not an issue. We're not going to get heated up. It's not like a microwave oven. These levels are much lower than heating. However, over the last 30 years, literally thousands of peer-reviewed studies have been published that report non-thermal effects that happen at thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of times lower than what the FCC says is safe. So the guidelines are completely fallacious and bogus, and they don't protect us at all. This is our new chairman of the FCC, Thomas Wheeler. He was the former top cell phone lobbyist. He was the former CEO of several tech, internet, and satellite companies, and he was the former president and CEO of the Cellular Telecommunications Internet Association. If you want to get into the history at all of him, you can read some of the early books about cell phone science, and you'll see that he was a major player. There is a Telecommunications Act that we should all be aware of when it comes to cell tower possible impacts. You actually cannot challenge cell towers based upon health. It was taken away from local, state governments, everybody. You cannot challenge it based on health. That was something that went into effect in 1996. So what can you do? You can be aware of the health issues, but if you want to challenge them, I mean, obviously you can take them on based on aesthetics. You can take them on based on property values. But obviously, the most important thing for us is our health. Now, if you really get into the issue of cell phone, or just the research on cell phones and wireless technology, one of the things you'll learn is that there's not a lot of money going around for this kind of research. Almost all the money is coming from the industry. So there's sort of a small group of scientists who are holding out, who have joined together and who have worked together to create a compilation, to create reports that really clearly show the public what's going on. And in 2007, one of these reports came out. It was called the Bioinitiative Report. And what they did was they took 2,000 peer-reviewed studies, and they went through them and they looked at them, and they found that there were very, very clear and serious issues. So getting to the cell tower, we're going to look at several different peer-reviewed studies because, I mean, it's going to be very compelling. And one of the first issues is cancer, is increased risk of cancer. So this first study was done in Israel in the late 90s. Basically, this is when the first cell towers went up. So you had a city where one cell tower went up, and they had a very clear case control situation where they could look at the people who lived around the cell tower versus those who lived further away. And what they found was that women especially were very, very susceptible to cancer. And so in the center column, you can see that women had 10 times greater risk of developing cancer who were within a certain distance. I believe that was within just a couple hundred meters of the cell tower. Men, not as much. Maybe it was overall risk was 4 times higher. Men was 1.5 times higher. So why are women more susceptible? Possibly higher water content, possibly different changes in different hormones. It hasn't been studied. Here's another study from Germany. This was, again, a case control study where you looked at people who lived further away compared to the other tower. And the inner area, which is the higher one, you can compare it to the outer one, which is off to the right. It was basically about a 4 times greater risk, 3 times greater risk of cancer. Here's another one from Austria. This is when cell towers first started coming in. And they found that breast cancer risk was 23 times higher for those who were living nearby. Brain cancer was 120 times higher. This is a recent one from Brazil. This one looked at the cancers, and they found that the mortality rate was 14 times higher for those who lived within 500 meters of cell tower vegetation. So why is this? What is it about a cell tower that's so harmful compared to cell phones? It means a lot less than having a cell phone next to your head, right? Well, it's about it being consistent, about being constant. You know, it's much different to have a short cell phone call for a minute or two. But if you're getting beamed by something all day and all night, that's a different kind of situation. Also, I mean, we're talking about microwave radiation. So this is. When I was a kid, we were warned not to stand in front of our microwave oven. My mom was stay far away from. I had no idea why. I don't think she had any idea why either. But somehow there was an awareness about it. But we've sort of lost some of that sensibility, I think. Now, in addition to cancer, there are other effects. There are neurological effects. And this is what you're going to see first. The whole brain cancer and cell phone thing, it's sort of a red herring. Because brain tumors usually take at least 10 years to show up. That would take a while to start to connect the dots. What would show up first? Well, it appears that the first symptoms are headaches, sleep disruption, anxiety. This is sort of gets into the electrosensitivity kind of thing. And so we'll see this throughout many of the different studies. This study from Lenore, Spain, found that, again, we have those who lived over 250 meters away versus 150 meters away. We found that there was a greater level of discomfort, sleep disruptions, depression, poor concentration, dizziness. Now, how many of you know somebody who has a sleep problem these days? I mean, this is becoming a very, very common issue. And it's not just about cell towers. As we'll get into, there's other wireless devices that can have the same effect. Again, headaches, irritability, these were things that they found in this study. France, 2002, they found that, now this is up to 300 meters away from the cell tower. So the closer you are to the tower, the more common these folks had fatigue, irritability, headaches, sleep disruption, difficulty in concentration, memory loss, skin problems. Skin's our biggest organ, right? That's something I haven't heard about before. Maybe the skin could be affected by microwave radiation. It's affected by UV radiation. Why not microwave radiation? Skin problem. When I first started doing community advocacy work, I was on the radio one day, and I was just talking about what I talk about, and somebody called in and said, "I've been having those same issues in my life." And they had me come out, and they thought it was a smart meter at first. It turned out it wasn't a smart meter. It was some sort of innocuous-looking tower. It looked just like somebody's old television antenna. But it turned out it was actually beaming something. A television antenna just receives information from far away. This one was actually sending information. And we found that the lady who was living right in front of it was having skin rashes. And at first I thought, that's just, again, sort of downplay things. Then I found, well, it's actually in the scientific research. And I found more people with that issue. So, dizziness, movement difficulties, cardiovascular problem. Now, if this works, I'd like to show you testing. So what we're going to do here is we're going to test. This is out in nature. We're testing for radiation. Notice there's no noise from the meter. This is normally a very noisy meter. This is in northern Vermont. And then here we are in front of a cell tower. Now this is underneath the main beam. The main beam you should be should be shooting out. So if you ever look at some charts, you'll see, well, underneath it would be the safest. Those levels are in the thousands of microwatts, and those are the same levels that were shown in the studies to cause all those different issues. When you start to measure, you really learn a lot. It cuts right through all of the gray area, because you'll see, wow, when I have this device, the levels are really high, but when I move the device away, the levels drop off. Or if I turn the device off, the levels completely drop off. You have so much power with this issue, so don't drop down into despair with this. you have a lot of power in that, more than a lot of other issues, that you can turn off this device. You can make changes in your life, in your home, and you can make dramatic improvements in your health and reducing the risk. So here's some more studies just to really hammer it in. This is a study from Egypt, looked at some office workers who were living underneath the transmitter, other office workers that were living across the street, and then we're comparing to people who lived further away. And again, the same issues: sleep disruption, tremors, memory changes, headaches. So this is across all cultures. This is across from all different countries in the world who are doing research, and it's not just about one group of people. So when you go to like the American Cancer Society website, or you go to some of these other websites, they parrot the same things that the FCC says, which is, well, there's very little research showing that there's no research. In fact, that's something they'll say. That's not true. Go and look at the actual science, and you'll see that these are peer-reviewed research projects from all over the world. These are real people who were they had the poor luck of living next to one of these towers. So this is what they found. They found that there were all kinds of hormonal changes, thyroid changes, cortisol changes. These are very clear biomarkers. This isn't something that's in somebody's head. This is very clear and tangible changes. Another study from Cyprus, they found the same things: headaches, dizziness, depression for those who were closer. And this one shows very, very clear radiation levels. 8,000. This is just, when you start to measure, this will make sense, but these are different power density levels. Notice that the FCC guidelines allow for 6 million units. We'll just call them units, microwatts per square meter. So what happens if you have levels of, say, 5,000, which is right in front of a cell tower? Compare 5,000 to 6 million. Well, the industry will say, well, we measured it. It's a very, very small percentage of FCC guidelines, 0.0001 something or other. And that, for most people, sounds pretty convincing. Well, that's because the FCC guidelines are ridiculous. They're completely obsolete and based on just a false premise. You want to base your comparison not on FCC, but on natural levels. What would the levels be before the radiation was there? What would levels be in a natural area? And then compare. Well, we're talking thousands of times higher than these other areas. So, I mean, if you were to change the levels in your home of any other chemical by thousands of times, I would think you'd probably start to experience effects too. There's evidence, there's studies on wildlife. Not a lot of studies. There isn't a lot of funding for this, but there was some research from Spain. They looked at bird populations. They looked at storks that were living within a couple hundred meters of the antenna versus those that were living further away. And they found that the storks who were within 200 meters of this antenna, they didn't take care of their nests. They fought with each other. And a lot of them never even got the job done. So it's interesting that animals are also affected by it. Frogs, they took frogs that were within 150 meters of an antenna, and they exposed them, and they had a comparison, which were frogs in a cage, this Faraday cage that blocked the radiation. Look at this, 90% mortality rate. This is not good. Bees. There's studies that show that we know that the colony collapse is one of the most serious things that we're facing. There's studies that show that when you expose a bee colony to RF wireless radiation, they go into chaos. And they start to go into the piping response. And other studies have found that they don't even return to their hive. They just disappear. We have studies on dairy cows. Very clear, milk production drops off when cows are right near a radio transmitter. So this is obviously not something that's in the cow's head, right? This is a very tangible effect. We have impaired fertility in humans. We've had reduction in sperm quality for the last 20 years. It's sort of a similar time frame to wireless. I'm sure there's other factors too. A lot of studies are showing that cell phone usage causes a decrease in sperm motility and sperm quality. And this is starting to make its way into different places. Now getting into children, children are way more sensitive than we are. And this is one of the most upsetting studies I've ever come across, which was a large study. This is not some little blip on the horizon. The Danish birth cohort studies were groups of tens of thousands of people, and they found that short-term exposure by the mother during pregnancy led to a much greater risk of permanent behavioral problems for the children. Right? That really goes against what we've been told about cell phones, which is that you can use them all the time and probably not even have an effect. Studies are showing that we're way more sensitive than that. This study involved 13,000 participants, and they found significant increases in hyperactivity, emotional conduct problems, all kinds of things. And the longer the mother spent on the cell phone during pregnancy, the greater the risk. So, I mean, this is as serious and upsetting as it gets, because these kids, they had no say in this, right? And the mothers had no idea what was going on either, because they've been lied to the whole time. So, children are extremely, extremely vulnerable. They found a 54% greater risk of behavioral problems for the mothers who had used a cell phone for more than, I think it was, 1 call per day. So, in our environment, the levels of RF have gone up dramatically over the last 10 years. And if you go back in history, these are my Vermont. I'm from Vermont, so it's always pretty. This is a snowy picture we see for 10 months of the year, it seems like, right? So back in the day, there was no wireless radiation. Wireless radiation is not natural. I mean, there's a tiny bit that's coming from the sun, but we're talking very, very small numbers. And if you think about it, for millions of years, we did not evolve with this. This is not something that we have dealt with, like we might have dealt with UV rays or something like that. Even as 100 years ago, 150 years ago, or the 1970s, the levels in the major cities in New York and the other major cities in 1970s, the levels were lower than they are in this room right now. Now, I went down to New York City a year ago and I measured it, and the levels were literally as high as if you had a cell phone next to your head. It's crazy. And there's just no regulation about it. Because again, it's all based on FCC guidelines. 40 or 50 years ago, the only antennas out there really were the radio towers. They were out there on some mountaintop somewhere. Now we have all these cell towers popping up all over the place. And nobody really knows, are they safe, are they harmful? Now we're thinking about putting them closer to public buildings. We have all these other wireless devices. We've got the phones and the tablets, the Wi-Fi, cordless phones. Cordless phones are one of the worst ones, all right? When cordless phones first came out, they only emitted radiation when you made a call. You pressed the call, and it radiated back and forth from the phone to the handset. Somewhere around 2005 or so, they started producing these cordless phones called DECT phones, D-E-C-T. And these cordless phones are constantly radiating. They radiate all day, all night. If you have one in your bedroom, go home, unplug it, get rid of it. Just seriously, get rid of it. Go back to a corded phone, because these emit the same amount of radiation as if you had a cell tower down the street. Incredibly high levels. We've got all these different devices we can be connected. Baby monitors, they do it too. Hard to find a wired one. Right in the center of this chart are microwaves. That's what we're talking about, microwave radiation. The old concept was that microwave radiation wouldn't have serious effects because it has less energy than gamma rays or ionizing radiation. Well, the same effects are there. It just might take a little bit longer. Now, this is different from your toaster oven or your dishwasher, where the radiation drops off in a foot or two. This keeps going for a distance. There were handouts. I don't know if we can read this, so we're not going to look into that.
But there's handouts. I think I'd go
Yes.
into it just really quickly.
On your way out, if you want to grab a copy of this, basically this is a set of peer-reviewed studies that shows at the top. Can you see numbers? No. it basically shows all these different effects and the levels of radiation that they were found at. And it really puts it in perspective that you don't want to have a tower nearby, or you want to play it safe for a lot of these different things. And it is possible to get your levels down beneath, in a lot of places, beneath the levels that are harmful. This is the old idea that, well, if you got far enough away from it, the radiation wouldn't be harmful. Well, that's only if you're based on FCC. This was a research that found within 4 hours, not just several hours, this was looking at rats, blood-brain barrier leakage. So the blood-brain barrier blocks our brain from chemicals and toxins that are in our bloodstream. We also have these kind of barriers in other parts of our bodies too. So they, on the left, they had a normal one. And after a few hours, they sacrificed the rat. They took a look in there, and they found that there was permanent damage to the brain within just a few hours. And these were levels that were 3,000 times lower than FCC guidelines. This study has been replicated many different times, so it's not just one. The eyes are our most sensitive organ. If you're on a Wi-Fi device, a tablet, or this is not a Wi-Fi right now, this is just corded, your eyes are right close to this all day long. There's a possibility for harm. All kinds of different things that could happen if there were brain damage, long-term issues. It shows the concentration of radiation if you had a laptop, a Wi-Fi laptop on your lap. There's effect on the skin. There's effect on the heart. There was a peer-reviewed study that came out a year or two ago that looked at people who were electrosensitive, and they found that when the device was on, the heart would immediately go into a different rate, right? It would start to drop down into this erratic heart rate. It's called tachycardia. We're starting to see that in schools where they're putting a lot of heavy-duty Wi-Fi in. There's kids who are having tachycardia, or even worse, in some schools in Canada, some kids have been just dropping with heart attacks. Whether or not that's due to something else, we don't know, but it's strange. It didn't used to happen before. The autism rate, right? It's now 1 in 50 children. It used to be, back in the 80s, it was 1 in 10,000. Well, the autism rate could be affected by a lot of different things, but it's clear that it's also related to RF wireless radiation. Dr. Martha Herbert of Harvard and Massachusetts General Hospital, she came forward a year or two ago and said that the claim that the only concern is thermal impacts is now definitely outdated scientifically. She went through the research. She found that there were hundreds of studies that showed effects on autism. And if you look at the autism curve, it happens to parallel the curve in radiation in our environment. Teen anxiety. But getting into autism for just a second, there was a very small pilot study that was done by a doctor named Dietrich Klinghardt, who's way ahead of the curve. And he found that when he looked at the mother's environments, the areas where the mother slept during the pregnancy years, and he looked at wireless, and he looked at a couple other types of EMFs, magnetic fields from power lines and stuff like that. He found that the mothers who had high levels of EMF were much, much more likely to have children with autism. I forget the exact statistic, but it was a big number. I think it was 5 times higher. So that's, I mean, I worked as a public health consultant. I go around and help measure people's homes. That's the one thing I would really like people to know, pregnant mothers to know. Midwives should know this. Just get the tools. Help the mothers measure those areas, because it's very, very preventable. Some of the risk is very preventable. But we have to learn about it first. You got to start by going to a talk and share it with your friends. There's good news in this, which is that you have the power to drastically reduce some of this. There's also a lot of bad news, obviously. We know that teen anxiety is up. There's a lot of pharmaceuticals that kids are on these days. It could have something to do with RF radiation, considering what's in the research. Number of doctors in 2005 in Germany, They studied the effects from different types of cell towers, and they found that, here again, there were effects of all these different things that were shown in the same cell tower studies. There's thyroid effects. A lot of folks with thyroid issues these days, right? Well, think about how close the thyroid is to your cell phone. Right? It's right there. It's right there. So there are groups that are stepping forward. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine came out in 2012 and said, listen, this is a really serious issue. We need to do something about this. Here's the effects. It's very well documented. You go way back into the day, 30, 40 years ago, there was research way back then that showed the same effects. This was military research. Somehow it got covered up, but it's all there. The same things from the cell tower study was all there 30 years ago. Lack of concentration, dizziness. It's not. This is not like this was well documented a long time ago. This was a really clear, wonderful video. If you want to watch a documentary, it's called "Take Back Your Power." And on the top, you have the blood cells of 3 different participants. And then on the bottom, these were exposed to smart meter radiation. And you can see that the cells aren't acting quite right. And the person on the right had all the cells clumped together. That was just after like a minute or two. So we've got this electrosensitivity. This is the key to doing something about this. If you guys want to do something about this, help people connect the dots. Realize that there are very clear connections between wireless radiation and health. A lot of different things that people are dealing with these days. Electrosensitivity is on the rise. It's possible that we're going to reach 50% of the population. I don't know. Right now, the World Health Organization says it's 3 to 5% of the population that's electrosensitive. It looks like it might be higher than that, but somewhere in there, it's 5 or 10%. That's a large percentage of the population. Melatonin production. That's one of the wireless radiation inhibits melatonin production. So that leads to a lot of different things, including sleep disruption. So children are not just little adults, right? They're very different. They're very sensitive. And they're expecting that we'll take care of them. They don't have the power politically. There's a lot of different warnings that are going out there from different groups. American Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Environmental Medicine. They have thinner skulls, they have a higher water content, their immune systems are not as well developed, their cells are rapidly dividing, and they have a much longer lifetime. They're going to be around, they're going to be exposed to this more. So we need to take special action to protect the children. Again, this was the brain cancer. So the iPads. We measured iPads. We found that iPads emit more radiation than cell phones. This is not good news if you're going to be using one for a long period of time or putting your children on it. And this, we found it was actually also in the Apple Product Information Guide. It's right there before us. The iPads emit more radiation than a cell phone. So think about this again. If a child under the age of 20 years has an increased risk of 700% of brain cancer after 1 year, what happens if they're on an iPad for several years? Who knows? This is all just unprecedented, untested. This is measuring an iPad. Notice it's maxing out the meter on the left with the little flashing dots. It's 100,000 microwatts or more. Right in somebody's lap. That was what started. It started on its own. Hundreds of studies now show DNA damage from wireless radiation. This is just a partial list. There's a study that came out a few years ago that found 4 hours Wi-Fi laptop on the lab, near the lab, produced DNA damage. This was a group of students from Denmark. They know how to do the research, how to make it clear to the adults. On the left, you have some sprouts that were grown far away from a Wi-Fi router. Same conditions though, same temperature, same sunlight. And then on the right, they stuck the plate of another plate right next to a Wi-Fi router, and that's what happened. Things just didn't grow. Smart. We should do it in our schools. We should all check this stuff out. Schools, classroom environment, the most unsafe place imaginable if you put in the heavy-duty Wi-Fi, which is where it's all going. It's all going towards these one-on-one computer programs. Think about it. If you have 30 computers or tablets in there at the same time, and you got the super high-power Wi-Fi routers, or maybe 2 of them if they really want to have it, top of the line. That's a lot of radiation in one room, and it's very hard to even calculate how high the levels are when you get that many devices at the same time. One of the worst things there is, girls are born with all their eggs. They're all there from the beginning. What happens if there's DNA damage? What happens if that tablet on their lap permanently damages their DNA? It's done. It's over for the rest. From that point on, you can't stop it. You can't take it back. You can't say you're sorry. It's over with. And parents really need to know about this. This is as serious as it gets. Mitochondrial DNA is 10 times more susceptible to RF radiation than other DNA. So there's a 57%, somebody give those numbers, 57.7% risk of permanent DNA damage. More and more updates. The scientists are coming forward. This is Martha Herbert, probably somewhere in here, Cindy Sage saying, a lot of these studies are showing effects. This is Martha Herbert's letter regarding Wi-Fi in schools. She wrote to the LAUSD last year. American Academy of Environmental Medicine saying adverse health effects are clearly documented. So we're recommending that schools do hardwiring. That's a big change from Wi-Fi, but it is possible. Here's a group of scientists who are saying that it's very important. From all over the world. These are the scientists who specialize in this. They don't have the conflict of interest. That's what they do. They study the radiation. They say kids be protected. And one of the most recent, one of the most recent things that happened just this last week was that there are teachers who are connecting the dots. They're realizing that they're affected by this wireless radiation. They have headaches, or they have heart palpitations, or all kinds of weird things. I've talked to one who had a metallic taste in the mouth, which is usually only what the guys up on the towers would experience. But they get that when they're in the room. And out in LAUSD, a accommodation was granted that a teacher was given her own classroom that was Wi-Fi free, which would be out in a trailer, but at least she was given accommodation. And this is the beginning, I think, of something we're going to see a lot more. So what do you do? I mean, the kids should be given a safe place, but at least she was given a safe place for them. There's a number of different awardments, different lawsuits that have happened for people who are EHS. That's going to be something we're going to see more in the future. The insurance companies won't cover liability insurance for this industry, so I mean that's really what it comes down to. If the government admitted it was a problem, what would happen? What would happen for the industry? I mean, it would be really big in terms of our financial picture. This was a Swiss Re. This was an insurance. This was a group that looks ahead at issues that may be affecting the insurance industry, and it said that one of the top the issues facing the insurance industry is RF radiation. So there's a Supreme Court case in Israel. It's moved along. They now have a conditional injunction against the use of Wi-Fi in schools. And how did this happen? The parents connected the dots. They realized that their kids were having effects in the classroom, like headaches and heart palpitations, and they weren't having it outside the classroom. And so they joined together and they sued the Ministry of Education, who has been kicking and screaming the whole way, and it looks like they're heading towards a permanent injunction. A lot of schools around well, I wouldn't say a lot, but there are schools around the world who are removing their Wi-Fi, and this is usually what happens is that somebody in the community starts to figure things out and shares the information, and Maybe the schools around them don't do it, but at least they went ahead and did what they followed the research. So it's good news in that respect. And here's a list of schools from all over, organizations. But Belgium just banned the sale of mobile phones for children. So what can we do? Well, first you got to protect the children. You know, don't expose them to anything that they don't need to be exposed to. Take precautionary action. We can't get rid of wireless radio. I mean, it's here to stay. Cell phones are here to stay, but use them safely. You know, educate yourself. Don't expose yourself unless you need to. Let the parents know what the effects are. What would happen if we became an informed society about this? Apply the precautionary principle. So if there's a suspected risk of something causing harm, those that want to take the action need to prove that it's safe first. That makes sense, right? Rather than us having to prove to them over and over again that it's harmful. Children are unable to remove themselves from harm's way. Their exposure is involuntary. We need to do the right thing to protect them. So in your own lives, I mean, there's a number of different things that you can do to reduce exposure. These are some of the first ones. As I mentioned earlier, the cordless phones. You take my word for it. You can go on YouTube. You can look at videos of people who measure them, and you'll see how high they are. I would dispose of them promptly, and they still make corded phones. You probably can't get them at the hardware store down on the corner. But if you go on Amazon, AT&T corded phones are some of the best. Yeah.
I'd like to say if you go to Savers in Framingham, they have a whole bunch of them for about $2, and I buy them for my clients and hand them out like candy. So they're not hard to find.
Great.
People don't want them anymore.
Great. And you can even get some of the nice old eclectic ones, right? I know some people that collect the ones that still get the ones that die. If you just want to sort of put your toe in the water with this, turn off the Wi-Fi at night. That doesn't take much. I mean, a lot of times what happens is if you get into couples, you get into spouses, one person gets this thing figured out before the other one does. And so the other one's kicking and, are you sure? Come on, look at what website said this. And I think you're getting carried away. And then, so start off gentle and just turn it off at night. It doesn't hurt anybody.
We put ours on a timer, so it's nice. Because what would happen is we'd get all snuggled in bed. We'd be like, oh.
To shut it.
You know what I mean? So now it just goes off and comes back on.
That's
Easy. You sleep better.
Do you know anything about the research about nighttime? That that's the time that your body's
well, that's what
rebuilding
they
itself?
say. They say that your body is much more susceptible at night. I haven't looked at the research on that though. And so I have clients who they did this and immediately they saw effects. One of the weirdest things we saw was that this was a doctor's home. We removed the decked cordless phone, which happened to be in the kitchen and was right underneath the room of the children. And the children weren't really having any noticeable symptoms before that, but the parents wanted to take action and try to do the right thing. But as soon as they removed the cordless phone, one of the children had serious effects happen right away. Suddenly they couldn't walk. They were, they had to be carried around. They were just having major effects. And I called around. I had to go talk to other advocates who were further along with this than me and say, have you ever heard this before? I called up to Canada where the Mathis Lab. They said, yeah, we've heard of this before. And sure enough, after about 3 or 4 weeks, the whole thing went away. So what was that? I still don't understand how it works. But the body had some sort of it had gotten used to it. It got used to the radiation in a way. But getting back to what you can do, is a lot of this is going to be about your cell phone, right? Start by, don't put it next to your head. Just please, whenever I see little kids on, I just want to go around and tell the parent, don't put it next to your heads. They make these air tube headsets. That's a good way to do it. Like $20 or $30 or something like that. And it's like a little stethoscope. So there's not actually a wire, but you can keep the phone over here and you can put this little thing in your ear, and that will reduce your radiation exposure a lot. Now it's not completely safe because this thing is still, think about it, the cell phone has to communicate with a tower maybe a mile away or 2 miles away. It can go through buildings, it can go through walls, it can go through concrete. It can go from you from 2-3 feet away, okay? So it's not perfectly safe if you have it right there. But that's a good place to start. Don't put it next to your head. Don't use it in the car, because whenever you use it in the car, it has to work harder. I mean, it actually works harder, so it actually will emit more radiation than even the FCC says is safe. So, try to start to change your behavior about how you use the cell phone, and turn it off at night. Don't keep it in bed. Some of these devices, they act really strange. They don't do what you think they should do. The old cell phones, they would just emit something when you're making a call. But a lot of these things now, they send out, they're like communicating. They want to communicate with other phones. Some of them act as a hotspot, so it actually provide Wi-Fi for you and your neighbors and everybody. Just turn that thing off when you're not using it. There's a group of advocates from California who are working with the industry to create a new app where you could just press a button and it would turn off all the antennas. The phone would still be on, but it wouldn't be radiating. And so then the next part of it is that it would give you a little alert once an hour. So you get your alert, you check your messages, you make your calls, you turn it back off, one button, and you can stay connected, but you're not constantly exposing yourself. So that's the cutting edge thing, and that takes advocates working with the industry. So yeah.
I don't know how you feel about these, but they also make those devices that there's, I don't know what it is, but it's metal in it, because you know how kids always put it in their back pocket? So one side, so it's not exposed to your skin. You know what I mean? So one side, you put it between your body, but it's a phone case. So, the kids don't want to feel weird or whatever, but it's a case for them, but it protects them. Because their phones can't get,
They come in good color.
radiation can't get to the body.
I think they're called Palm, is that right? Palm cases? It helps, yeah.
So I have a question. Is it for naught that I've always checked the radiation emissions from whatever phone I would let my children use?
Not for naught. No, I think it helps.
Okay.
But the biggest thing is how long do you use it? How long do you use
No, we
it?
don't.
And with
But,
kids, it's challenging. I know.
and of course, texting is always safer than putting the phone.
Yeah. I mean, a really good project would be to produce, outreach material for teenagers, something that would be appropriate for them.
How can I go home and test the radiation at my house?
They make little radiation testers. They range in price from $100 on up.
I have one that we can pass around.
Oh,
But sometimes I think that you're down, it says consider having a consultant. So I think that sometimes a consultant can kind of show, because even though we've been aware at our house for a while about this, and I don't know that smart meters, that anybody definitely knows what a smart meter is, but I had checked our house because I became aware about it 2 years ago, that smart meters are all over California, and that's where I'm from originally. So my family had to fight these meters, and half of my family were like, oh, you can feel it, and the other families weren't. But maybe you could just tell really quick what a smart meter is.
Yeah.
But in knowing that, I wanted to find out if we had a smart meter, and most of us in Sherborn do not. It's not come here yet, so just
Right.
that at least is something we haven't had to do. But I have one, and maybe you'll tell what a smart meter is.
I mean, the best thing to do in terms of measuring would be for somebody in the community to have one. Maybe you or a group of people buy one together, and they learn how to use it.
Sign me up.
I have one. So
Because
we'll pass it
ultimately,
around.
you need to become educated on this, because this is going to be an issue that's going to keep continuing into the future. So you can buy cheap ones. This is the best one that I know of. This is called an acoustimeter. It's the one I had in the video. And this one's $200 or $300 or so, $350. They make also a smaller one that's portable. It doesn't look like you're carrying around something that's big. So the smart meters was a very clever marketing term, so like smartphones. Who wants to argue with something that's called smart, right? But it's a wireless meter that goes on your house that measures your electrical usage. And the idea, the good part of it is that it's supposed to be able to let you know whether or not there's a power outage, let the utility know if there's electrical outage, so they could get to your house right away and help take care of it. It also is supposed to keep detailed information about your electrical usage so that you could reduce your usage. There's a lot of other issues that there apparently are with these things, such as maybe too detailed much information about your electrical usage. And congressional reports I looked at showed that these devices could tell exactly what appliance was on at what time. Maybe that's not something you want, or maybe it doesn't matter as much, but maybe a little bit too much of an invasion of privacy. But the issue in terms of wireless is that these things emit pulses. They don't just keep track of your information and like check once a day. They're always communicating. So they're sending off these pulses every 10 seconds in some cases with all the other smart meters in the neighborhood. So they communicate to the next one, the next one, the next one, and they all share information. Are you okay? Okay, okay. And they do all this. The maker of those devices say, well, this shouldn't be harmful because this is only a real short pulse. This is like a millisecond. And if you add up the milliseconds, it only comes to like 20 seconds a day. Well, the reality is that it's a really sharp, like turning on, a sharp noise in a way that happens every 10 seconds. Your body feels it. Your cells know what's going on. And if it happens consistently like that, some people have really strong effects. Some people who were perfectly fine with other kinds of wireless devices, they were fine with their Wi-Fi, their cell phones, whatever else, but as soon as that smart meter was put on their house, their health collapsed. And these are people of all walks of life: doctors, nurses, teachers, everyone. And so some people in areas where they wouldn't allow you to opt out, they'd have to leave their homes. They'd have to go out and try to figure something else for a while. But fortunately, after enough people fought it, they have opt-outs in most areas. So it's something you want to be aware of. But measuring it is a good thing. I used to try to really just help people learn how to measure it themselves, but eventually I realized that there was really a need for me to go around and measure people's homes because there are different kinds of EMFs and there's usually surprises. There's usually, I'm not saying they're big surprises, sometimes they are. And it's a valuable service, and it's a valuable thing to know what your levels are in the home, and there's different things I can't talk about in this because it just would take another couple hours that I can come in and I can tell you in just a short period of time. So I recommend you find somebody at some point who can do that. The big thing is to change your relationship with this stuff. It can be done. You can run a wire to your computer. Most things, even the iPads now, they have ways that you can hook them up. You don't have to use the Wi-Fi. So maybe you can't use it all the different places that you had used it before. Maybe you have to pick a few places where you use the device, but it can totally be done. So this is a doable situation. So any questions?
Can I just add, a lot of people already know this, but there is one organization that's rejecting the SARS levels for the phones, which is the specific absorption rate. But if you're using the phone and it has a bad signal, that's when you really want to tell the kids not to use it because the phone is really straining. Is that your understanding as well? That's what they've said.
Yeah, it's really weird. The further you are away from the cell tower, the harder the phone has to work. So if we come back to like this Dover-Sherborn school situation with the towers being near the school, if the tower is so far away that there's spotty coverage, those who are using their phones are going to have their phones are going to be working worse. But the question is, how far away do you want that tower to be, right? And obviously, we're not all going to be thinking about this all the time. You don't want to focus on all this all the time, but you want to have the tower be a certain distance away that there is proper connectivity, but you don't want to put it so that it's looming over the school and beaming through the windows. So I think the ideal distance if would be something like 700 to 1,000 meters away, something like that. Is there a place? We looked at the map. It looks like there may be a place further past the school grounds, out to the west of it. Just that would be much safer. That's about the ideal way to do it. We're going to continue to use these devices, but just use them in a safer way. So the SAR ratings for cell phones, it's just another silly thing. They basically fill a mannequin's head with soapy water, and then they test the soapy water to see how much the measure, how much the temperature changed, and that's the basis for cell phone safety.
I know in India, a couple of states passed regulations where you couldn't put cell phone infrastructure near hospitals or schools or prisons. And is there any leeway in the United States if, for example, we were to try to put that on the ballot in Massachusetts or something like that, in terms of having more say on the siting?
I don't know the answer to that. I would recommend contacting like the EMR Policy Institute, who really deals in the high-end politics of this. I'm more like the middleman who deals with the on-the-ground issues. I think that there's always the ability to get the power back, to do things about the Telecommunications Act. I think that local towns can have power about this, but things are moving pretty fast, and people need to get up to speed on this. Because the industry, the FCC guidelines are up for reconsideration, reevaluation right now. They'd like to open it up even more. So, all kinds of things.
Is that in response to the letter from the American Pediatric Association or is it?
Yes, the FCC guidelines were under review, so all these different organizations sent in letters. American Academy of Pediatrics did. The Department of Interior wrote a letter saying, "Come on, the FCC guidelines are ridiculous." They were created based on science from 1986, right? That's like what, 25, 30 years ago, and they haven't been updated since. So yeah, there's a way we can use this technology. The cell phones will operate at very, very low levels. Now the school's a little bit of a challenge because you got all these different walls, right? You got wall after wall after wall, and you need to get this signal through all these different walls. So, you may have to compromise a little bit there, but you just obviously don't want to put this tower too close to the school.
It might be a new point coming up because all the new Apple phones have the capability of using wireless. They don't even hook to a cell tower. They use a wireless connection. So would it be safer to do a room that has wireless, that kids are not exposed to wireless throughout the whole entire school, but maybe can go to a room and get connected there because they would be able to connect to a Wi-Fi if they have an Apple phone, for instance. And I'm sure all the other phones are going to come that way.
Well, that would be ideal, to have there be one room that the kids would go to, but I don't think that's probably very practical. It would be nice to have maybe reception that was stronger in one part of the school. It's a whole other challenge with kids and their cell phones in the classroom. As I understand, they're amazingly adept, right, with all the texting, right, and all that kind of thing. You got to start discussing it really, because you don't want these kids on them all day long.
Just a question, the Wi-Fi is in a room. Is the Wi-Fi then only communicating with the end user? Because I would assume if it's in the room and you use it, wouldn't the peripheral room still be affected?
Yeah,
I'm
the way
just
it
curious
works-
how the Wi-Fi device is actually enabling the technology. If it's
so how it's enabling a
no,
technology?
are different Wi-Fi systems setting off more or less
Right.
activity, and then is the Wi-Fi dangerous from the perspective of it's communicating only with the device,
Right.
or when you tap in to use the Wi-Fi, it's then sending out something that disperses around, including to that device?
Well, when I first started using a cell phone, I thought, well, that's pretty magical that my cell phone can communicate straight to the tower, right, and back and forth. And then I realized, no, it doesn't. It doesn't actually. It's not that smart. What it does is it just sends it out everywhere, and then some of it happens to get to the tower. So it goes through everything to get there. And the same for Wi-Fi. So if this was there was a transmitter on the ceiling, it just covers a couple hundred feet. The more walls you have in between you, it drops off pretty strongly after there's a wall or two.
Aren't there different types of commercial grade wireless Wi-Fi systems that schools are now operating to?
There's a real push to go bigger and better, and so now they're putting in the higher power ones. They call them industrial grade. It gets into something that's sort of complicated. It's not just about the level of the radiation, but it's the amount of pulses that can go through the air. So they set these things up so that they can communicate with hundreds of computers. That's a lot of information, and all that information, our bodies are electrical in nature. Our cells communicate via electrical impulses. Our nervous system communicates via electrical impulses. There's information that's going through our body, and there's all these little frequencies, that are there. When you take all this information and you send it through the cells, it's basically jamming the signal in a way. And the more frequencies, the worse, right? So, so that I know, in terms of practical, I know that in our area, I do some local grassroots work, and there were some librarians who were doing fine with the previous Wi-Fi system. But as soon as they came in and they put the Cisco heavy-duty industrial-grade system, this is a very small Vermont library, and they put one in that was capable of running a couple hundred computers, and you walk in there, there's nobody in there on a computer at all. There's some kids, it's like reading books, but as soon as they put this high-power system in, the librarians started to have health issues. And of course, they started to feel, sort of self-conscious. They didn't know about them. It's a very complex issue, but it just happened as soon as it went up. And, it's not like they were asking for trouble or anything like that. So the stronger the equipment does have greater biological effect.
Have you seen, with cell towers, have you seen any examples of where they tried some way to limit where the waves are going so that you can minimize in certain directions, say towards the school, the amount of power, where they've actually adjusted it in some way, or some technology that could be that kind of fine-tuning of where the transmissions are going?
I haven't been at this long enough to have seen that. I know that it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard that we've been told, obviously,
That it's
by
not
civil
possible?
industry that they,
Oh,
it
it's
may be
totally
possible, but it's not something that's currently.
It can totally be done. But
we
it takes enough pressure, it takes enough people to say, listen, we have to do this. And
you don't know of examples then?
again, I would
people
talk to
that we know of examples?
I mean, there's situations where certainly they said no to towers because there are already plenty of towers around.
Right, we're not facing that kind of issue.
But I don't know any situation just like that. I would call EMR Policy Institute because they deal with all the different cell towers all over the country. They take calls all day long.
So you talked about a lot of studies with adults and a lot of studies with kids. Are there any studies with the group that's going to be affected, the adolescents and the early adults? Because their growth and their hormone changes are so exponential at that point. I was just wondering if you knew of any specific studies.
There were a few studies. I haven't read them. They're only 2 or 3. There's very little research being done. Very little money available right now. From Europe, and they found changes in behavior for teenagers at certain levels, and these were 30 microwatts. So that would be if you had a Wi-Fi router in the next room, perhaps that would cause those kinds of things. So if this was a Wi-Fi router, like in most schools, I'd be exposed right now to about 10,000 units, right? And if this was on, this would be another 20,000. It's about 20,000 or so. But if I turn this off, and if I hardwired it, and that was not there, it's very possible you could get down to those levels, get underneath those levels. So, but you have to start with the measurements, and not from the angle that you're trying to push in the technology. It's not comparing the FCC guidelines compared to the actual studies. It's the one chart that's floating around. Hopefully there's enough copies of that. You can see what levels are safe and what levels aren't safe. So you want to measure and make sure that those levels are what you have in your home or what you have in your school.
So obviously there's no long-term studies, but with the hormonal changes in adolescents and early adults, we might, long-term studies, see real problems with births and things like that, right? I mean, just...
There's all kinds of things that could happen.
Yeah.
But there's no all this technology was brought out without any pre-market safety testing. Then what happened was that some people developed brain tumors, and they went on Larry King, and they made a big issue about it. And so then suddenly that night the stock plunges, the different telecommunication stock plunged like 10%. Motorola dropped 10%. And so So the different companies had to scurry to come up with a solution. So suddenly the government and the industry came together and said, all right, well, we do have the research. So they probed further, they found there was no research. So then they said, well, okay, we will do the research. And they funded a $25 million research program. It's supposed to be funded partly by the government, partly by the research, by the cell phone companies. And once research started coming out that showed harmful effects, then the funding dried up and they found all kinds of issues. So, it's we just don't have the long-term research. But I think that it's better to play it safe than sorry, right? As much as you can, as much as you can. There's certain things that are very, very preventable.
We're dealing with, there's not enough information around in some ways. Would you view it as apples and oranges when you're thinking about the exposure issues from cell towers versus the radiation impacts from wireless routers in classrooms and schools?
No, I
Or
think
do you-
they're very, very similar.
So there's a sense that we have limited energy and ability to influence things. Whether the classroom issues from wireless, which is probably even harder to deal with, whether that's, in your view, is that a more important place to stake your efforts, so to speak, versus towers that, let's say, are even 300 meters away?
Well, when it comes
how do
to
you
like
compare that?
a cell tower in a school, I mean, I think that that's just very clear. It should be put further away from the school.
No, I agree with that. The question is dealing with a cell tower that's 300 meters from the school versus dealing with routers in the classroom.
The routers are worse.
I'm just trying to
But
figure out
how much worse? We're talking, AK-47 versus, another bad weapon. These are very serious things. They're both harmful. So if the cell tower gets put up, it's not going to get taken down. That's just too serious of a thing. You can always unplug a wireless device at some point once people realize things further along. So you got to start with the tower, really. Things are definitely moving in a direction. I think that within 10 years, the Wi-Fi in the schools, it's very likely that the Wi-Fi is no longer going to be there because now it's starting to get into the lawsuit phase. The schools didn't listen. They didn't play nice. So now there's a number of big-time lawsuits that are happening. Same thing with cell phones. There's several large class action lawsuits that are making their way through federal courts. And each of these lawsuits is in the range of $100 million, I think, something like that. So I think it's going to get there. But some schools are going to be way ahead of the curve. That's just how it is. They're not all going to get there at the same time. So the smartest thing that you could do is to say, wow, if there's research that shows that this has impaired effects on cognition or impaired effects on behavior, wow, what could we do to really improve the learning situation? Maybe we should try at least in half the school. Let's do what we can to get ahead of the curve. And maybe our kids will have a higher performance. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, and there are studies on different types of EMFs that show that they come in and they do the changes in the classroom, and suddenly drastic changes occur. Teachers are healthier. Students get focused a lot more quickly. They have fewer behavioral problems. So this could be a really good story.
What direction then would you be saying? Get rid of the routers and go with the cell tower, or get rid of the router, ideally, router, cell tower, and then have plug-in devices only?
I would say first, do whatever you can to spread the word about the cell tower. Make sure the cell tower doesn't go up right next to the school. Second, hardwire the classroom.
Hardwired, that's what I'm going. Okay.
Can you give, I know that, like looking at a visual and knowing that those soccer fields and saying a kid is exposed under those soccer fields for 3 hours a day, for 5 days a week. What is that? Like if you're only, I forget how many feet you would be from the soccer field, basically you'd be playing underneath it in those fields. Can you give us an idea of 3 hours a day? Is that almost as bad as being on a cell phone for those 3 hours or an hour or 10 minutes or, I guess that would help people to realize even if we can get it away from the school, if your kids are out playing for 3 hours a day for 5 days a week, they're being exposed to their whole entire body versus just next to your ear.
We don't have direct research on that, but the thing that just came to mind again was the study from the Danish study, and the moms. And I mean, this was different because these are very, very young children. These are either an embryo or this was during while the pregnancy was happening. So it's not the same thing as a teenager, but we could see there that there was effects after an hour or two. But there's no research I can think of. There's going to be animal studies, there's going to be things like that, but there's no research at all really on children because it's unethical to do. So we really have to say, well, either we should wait for all the studies to say that there's harm, that it's safe, which could take a really long time, especially if they're industry-funded studies. It could take 40 or 50 years. At which point, it's entirely too late. There's nothing you can do at that point. Or we go this way and we say, let's play it safe, or we do something else. Go ahead.
I think, part of the thing is that, it's overwhelming to think of the work that would go into changing the entire school and whatever. I think it's doable, and I think you're giving us hope that there are schools that are, but start at home. Like every single person can go home and call Comcast and get a hardwire.
Yeah.
Get it out of your house at least from when those kids get home at 3 o'clock until 7 the next morning. You've now removed that assault, that entire chunk of the day. Then we go into the schools and then we collaborate and we work towards safer environments in the school system. But start at home, because your kid's on a cell phone and then a laptop and watching TV on a screen this big, and you've got Wi-Fi. That's a huge assault. If you can get that piece taken care of at home, that's easy.
Yeah.
Then you move in and you deal with the school system piece. But
It's about education and it's about getting allies for dealing with the schools. You need allies. You need allies in the parent community that understand the science and that potentially have medical backgrounds that can share concern, and it's.
Well, there's a lot of parents who don't know anything about it, and when they hear about this, they'll have a knee-jerk reaction the opposite way,
And they'll Google it.
and they'll Google it,
Yeah.
and then they'll hear it's perfectly safe, and then they'll be experts on it. But I mean, so you really have to. It's going to be about numbers. You got to increase your numbers, because there's going to be a lot of parents who just demand that they have what the other schools are having, what the other kids are having.
But they don't understand the risks. It's the
They
reality.
don't.
But is there, other than the economic thing of changing over to hardwire, I mean, is there any disadvantage for our children being at Pine Hill School or whatever school you're in this community to have it hardwired versus wireless? I mean, what is?
Some of the wires may break, right? There could be some kids that forget there's a wire attached and it might break something. There could be more logistical issues like that. You have to figure out how to wire it, which is totally doable. I mean,
Are there people, experts that sort of navigate that for school systems or big companies or?
well, we're at the beginning of all that. There's not too many of them. From what I understand, the LAUSD, the Fullerton High School, there were some activists out there who just pushed really, really hard. Cameras in the faces of school board members. They pushed really hard. They took it to the lawsuits, and eventually the high school just hardwired, sort of quietly just did it. So it can happen.
How long ago was that, right?
That was very recently. That was within the last few months.
Great.
So it can happen. It doesn't take much, just some wiring.
If you had a choice between a cell tower at 650 feet from the school or 850 to 1,000 feet from the school, which would you rather have?
The one that's 850 feet away from the
Because I just want to make sure this body understands. Sorry, I'm Dana White. I'm chair of the regional school committee, and we're the ones going to be talking about this on October 7th. If this cell tower does not happen on our campus, it will go through on a private parcel of land that's 650 feet from our high school, period. And as Ray pointed out, the Telecommunication Act of 1996 keeps our regulatory committees in our towns from saying no to that application purely on the basis of health risks. And I can, knowing that they've already put in an application that shows that there's no impact on real estate values, that there's no impact on aesthetics, it will go through in the town of Dover. And that will be 650 feet from our school. So the main reason, and I'm not an expert on public health, so I won't even try to get into a debate about different studies, because that's not my area of expertise. But what we're trying to do is play the cards that we have, and the cards that we have tell us there's going to be a tower 650 feet from our building. And so we feel by taking control of the situation and trying to put it farther, that we have listened to farther is better. It also allows us, by being the landlord and not the abutting neighbor, we've actually put into the RFP money that would require testing to happen every year. So if there are any things that we don't know about, we'd have funds to test. Unlike if we were just the abutter, we wouldn't have funds from the company to test. And finally, were the FCC guidelines to drop in the future, which I'm sure that there are a lot of people who would like them to drop, being the lease owner, we would have recourse to be able to go out and go back to the tower companies and say, now you need to adhere to this new set of guidelines. So we can be the abutter, or we can be the lessor. And that's what I just encourage people, especially when they think about the petition, that's the outcome that happens if we say no. It will be close.
So you're saying that if it goes on school property, it will be 850 feet?
The two sites that we're looking at on our campus, one is 850 feet away and one is about 1,200 feet away, according to our EF engineer who did the distance.
What I would say is, when I looked at the overhead map, it looks like school grounds do go further than those proposed sites. Is that right?
Those are the two sites that are in the RFP right now.
So there is a possibility to move this tower further back on school
If
property.
it goes further back, it will get taller because the topography falls off. So
The question is whether, right, I've been advocating going further away. If you can, the question is whether taller increases the exposure or not.
well, the other thing is then no one might bid on that RFP. The RFP would have to change. We'd have to start the process over.
You don't think you could renegotiate that within this winning one, that you could make? I thought you could make adjustments.
I don't know if we could cite it because it's an economic decision for them too.
Right.
So
Whether it's still worth looking into.
because we already know that what their preference is versus what our preference, or what we'll discuss in a second.
Whether it's
So that's my only concern is that if this says, if we say no to this, it will be closer.
What I would suggest very, very strongly is for the school to look back at the proposal and see if there's a possibility to continue to have control over where the cell tower goes, but to put the cell tower as far as possible away from the school. How many can you get 600 meters away? I bet you can get pretty close. I think you're the ones in control, not the industry. So it's a really bad idea to put it 850 feet away. I think I'd recommend that work with the parents and the industry to put it at a safer distance.
And can I just respond to that too? I just want to make everyone aware that we were aware of this situation and the complexity of it, and we're very sensitive to it, and don't, but we really feel like we just like a little more time. This sort of happened very quickly, and a lot of it over the summer, and when people weren't around, and we just felt like Karen and I and Lori felt like if we just had a little bit more time to just work with the school committee, and maybe some other community members to maybe come up with some other solutions. Look at the property again, like Ray was saying. It looks like there might be some other possible locations. Maybe even look at with this abutter. I mean, a group of 50 parents showed up at a cell tower meeting in Texas there was out in the paper a couple weeks ago, and the cell company walked away. So if this abutter, if we I don't want to make trouble for people, but he or she is talking about putting this, close to a school. Maybe we can fight that one too. I mean, we've got a lot of people here who have a lot of, I think, concern about this thing. And just because to say, well, A is better than B, it's still that doesn't change the fact that A is still
Harmful to our children.
harmful to our kids.
Say it like it is. It's harmful to our children.
So we're not trying to be antagonistic at all. This was totally done in a spirit of cooperation, and we are happy to be the ones doing the legwork, to get information, to round people up, to do whatever we have to solve this in the best way possible.
Can I just ask, what is the reason for the cell tower on school property or off of school, right near school property? Is it for the high school itself?
AT&T has a gap in its coverage, and so the FCC gives the carriers greater ability to put towers where there are gaps in coverage. And so it put the application with this private parcel in Dover, and that's what kicked us into a discussion about it. And I think if anyone's been on the campus, they know that cell coverage is very spotty. In terms of emergency response, we're woefully deficient in our ability to respond to any emergency. If we were in a lockdown situation or any of those, there's no cell coverage to be able to enhance emergency preparations. Coaches and parents can't get in touch with kids. If there's an emergency on the backfields now, it's very spotty as to whether they would get coverage if there was a need back there. So that kick-started the discussion about the benefits of it, and then what we could do about it being right next door.
As far as being safety-wise, or as far as the part about that, we need cell service, I think that the new technology that's coming out in phones will allow your phone to connect to the closest Wi-Fi. Towers should become obsolete, and it looks like that's the direction of the things that's happening. Towers will be obsolete, and remind us that when this tower goes up, you can't take the tower down, and you sell it to multiple things. Hence why they want it taller, because it allows more coverage. So as far as Wi-Fi or whatever, that's a whole nother animal to hit. But coming from Columbine, where I had lived right after the Columbine issue, you should all be aware that when cell service, they shut down things when there's an emergency. It's all shut down. They did it during the marathon. They shut it off. So thinking that you're going to be able to call your kid, which is not a good idea anyway, if they're hiding in a closet or they're hiding somewhere, you don't want to be calling. So as far as safety goes, you have a way now these phones will be able to talk to Wi-Fi stations. Cell towers should not be erected. They won't be necessary. So as far as the safety, the other thing about safety I'd like to say is that we keep talking about once it's on ours, we have so much more ability to check the safety of it. The safety levels we've already seen, it doesn't matter. They're not safe levels. So if it gets up there, big deal, we can check it. I'll take over my thing over there for you and check it for you. That doesn't cost any money. So in putting that into the thing is not where we need the safety. We need the safety before it goes up, or at least know how far can we push the thing away so that the safety is already implemented in the distance.
And I'm going to say just one more thing to address the whole connection issue. I was made aware last night by a town official, Sherborn town official, that there's a cell tower going in to the Farm Pond area, right at the corner of Lake Street and Goulding. And I was told, and I'm going to verify this, I want to follow up, that's why I wasn't even planning on saying anything, but I was told that cell tower, when it goes in, it's supposed to go in soon, will provide coverage to DS. So that may be a moot point.
However, unfortunate for those Sherborn residents that will be living right under it.
Can I add to what she was saying about the school too? I've been working mostly with the issue of the smart grid, and if you don't know, the smart meters have been mandated for Massachusetts for the investor-owned utilities. But Jennifer Flanagan sponsored a bill which was completely, there was a huge pushback by the Massachusetts Municipal Association, but it was a co-location bill for the utilities, and it basically says if you have a tower, you cannot prevent somebody else from also installing infrastructure on that tower. Now, it didn't pass here in Massachusetts, but we're seeing this in other states, and it really was only held back for political reasons. AT&T has a whole bunch of applications going down the Route 2 corridor, and Greenfield already shut it down. They blocked the installation of this tower. It wasn't in a school, but it was near a family that had somebody who was electromagnetically hypersensitive. And I don't know if it's a permanent sort of victory, but there was a significant delay. There's a tremendous amount of pushback, and there was a couple of places in California also where they shut down AT&T applications. I think the AT&T applications are actually tied into the smart grid and the smart meters. And what happened in Massachusetts was The pilot program was in Worcester, and because of pushback in that community, it's been delayed now for 2 years. The smart meters are already in, but the pilot program hasn't started. But the Massachusetts DPU has already mandated the smart meters for Massachusetts. So we paid $48 million for this pilot program, which has not proven anything. And we're really trying to bring this into the election because this is one of the reasons why there are so many more towers needed, because they want to put up these antennas to read all these water, gas, and electric meters. So I want to give you hope. There's a lot of and if you go online to Hilltown Community Rights, you can sort of pick up the conversation a little bit about how the people in this Greenfield and 2 other communities shut down AT&T. Because I think you might have more options than just how far away you're going to put it from the school, and really start asking questions. The other thing would be legally to put in some kind of thing, because this bill hasn't passed yet. So I'd be very proactive and say that nothing else can go up on that tower. And also some sort of pre-compensation anticipatory, that if there are any health issues in the school, that they're going to be liable. Because, the Telecommunications Act of 1996 prevents you from stopping them putting up the tower, but who's going to be liable if there are issues after the tower goes up?
These are complicated issues.
Is it a possibility, if there are children at the middle school and high school that are diagnosed with electrosensitivity, that those parents could somehow pull medical rights to stop this from being placed in a public setting? I mean, is that even a possibility?
It looks like it may be a possibility because of what you just shared about the tower over in Greenfield. So I know that it's starting to happen with the Wi-Fi in public places. So I think that is the key. That is the key, is to help parents connect the dots, because even if the low end, even if it's 3% of the population, like the World Health Organization said, how many kids are in the school? Is it over? It's over 1,200, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be several children that
3% of 1,200 is a lot. So I think it's like 30. So and that's the low end of the scale. And these are people who should just know. I mean, Dietrich Klinghardt is one of the top MDs who deals with this. Says the average person who comes to him has been to 26 other doctors before him, and most of those doctors have no idea. They'll just prescribe something. So, and then finally they figure out, oh, it was the Wi-Fi router next to the bed or something like that, and then in a lot of cases things improve. So, you got to connect the dots. So I think what we'll do is we'll put together a flyer that will list the health, the health effects, and then have underneath that the contact information for this group, so that people can start to network together.
So this Health Act of 1996, does it include education? Because if we do put the cell tower very close, we can fight that it will thwart our kids' education, right?
I don't know on that. I mean, cell towers are once it's up, I think it's going to be there. But I think that the Telecommunications Act doesn't even matter if it's in a school or not. It's health issues. So but I don't have all the answers on that one, to tell you the truth. My goal is to really show folks that the science is there. That there's more than compelling science at this point, and my feeling is if there's enough people, it's grassroots activism, really. If you have a crowd of 100 people who are willing to take a stand for something, I mean, good luck standing in their way. I mean, it's just you're going to do what you need to do. So that's really, I think, the biggest hope.
I do know another little piece with that too. Sorry, I'm talking so much. Which is that when the FCC called for statements, the city of Boston and the city of Pennsylvania, together Pittsburgh, put in a joint statement to the FCC saying that the conflict between the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Telecommunications Act of 1996 have never been resolved. And that's the question that you're asking about, whether if there are children who need accommodation. So it is still not resolved, and it's going to take communities forcing that issue. However, you probably already know Canada just did this yesterday, and the Human Rights Tribunal did not recognize electromagnetic sensitivity. So now there's going to be a big lawsuit because it didn't go the way they wanted it to. And Maine is doing a judgment, I think, today on the smart meters. They have a lawsuit there that they haven't dealt with the health issues. So it is going to take a lot of pushback, but there is a recognition that this is unresolved.
So I just had a couple of comments. I was concerned about all the things that we're talking about here, and that they take a lot of time, in that we're trying to talk about changing the FCC regulations. And I don't think there's any question that a basis on health is a denial. It is possible for denial. I think you're right in that aesthetics and property values, but I don't think health is a possibility. So that means changing legislation that is national legislation. Right now, the town of Dover and Sherborn are being faced with an abutter who has a right to have, they're having a postponed balloon test. They are closer to the boundaries of the school. There's no question about that. There's also no question about the fact that when the school committee engaged an engineer, the first thing that was the engineer's mandate was, where is the safest possible place that this could reasonably go? And that was the mandate from our committee. And unfortunately, I think what you were saying about compromise, I think this is exactly that situation where I'm all ears as far as what we can do in the future, but right now there's an immediacy to this issue, and if we say no, we don't want it, we don't like it, which I'm all ears, but the fact of the matter is we have an abutter who is not a person with children in the school system, and we can go banging on the doors as much as we want, but the reality, the practicality of the situation is it's very unlikely that the planning board is going to deny it based on us not liking it, especially when there's just not enough information, I think, at this point that we can bring forward. It hasn't been brought forward in a million other challenges, and there have been so many challenges. Towns have tried this throughout the country, and it just hasn't been particularly successful. I'm very interested in Greenfield. I have to say, I'm all ears for Greenfield, but I find that that's probably an anomaly. I don't know what is going on there, but I'm interested.
Question is whether people.
I have a question.
Or the activists, if people are interested, right, if we're trying to be active, sorry, cut you off there, of whether it has to be addressed to the abutter in Dover who has their project, and whether if you want to come up with an argument to counter the school committee and other people's feelings, whether it's going to come down to can you make some impact, have some impact on the abutter to say that they would hold off on the process. Because the school committee, I've watched this process over the last few months. It's hard to dispute the need for the school to move forward for the reasons given, unless you can get the abutter to call off and postpone what they want to do, and they've postponed what they want to do already to let the school go forward. And so they've exhibited that kind of openness. The question is, who's going to go and deal with the abutter and get them to waive their issue in time so that the school committee doesn't feel like it has to act? And then I'll shift to another gear where the school committee on its other right learns more about its parameters to massage the current bid in terms of location, because the idea of whether it's taller might still lead to less exposures at the school if you move it further away. We have a 10-year, I think it's a 10-year base lease. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe we could have negotiated a 5 or less base lease so that as technology changed, we might have been able to shut off the tower as opposed to have to wait now 10 years. But maybe that's too late in terms of that, or whether you have the right to renegotiate those things. But those kind of parameters, and I know some people on the committee don't believe, I believe that, fine, getting it an extra few hundred feet away makes a difference even if it's taller. And all those little marginal things make a difference to me. It still comes back to, I don't know how much leeway you have with the current bid, and versus also who's going to go to the abutter to take the pressure off of the school committee in time to do that. And I would say that's the priority.
Well, we pulled this together in 2 weeks, and we are more than fired up. And I think nobody knew about this abutter, and nobody knew not enough. If we got 50 people that go to the meeting and say, really? And we've got, we've contacted the people in that neighborhood. I mean, and, they complain about the aesthetics and the property values. I mean, we'll pull out all the stops to stop it there too. I mean, he's putting a cell tower up next to a school. That's got to be inflammatory to some respect. I mean,
And I also think if the school committee were to reject their proposal, it sends a message that there are unanswered questions.
But you understand, if we reject the proposal, it goes to the applicant, and the process with the town of Dover Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals starts up on
right, and we
October
can go to
8th.
those
But don't
meetings
you
and
think the
we
planning
can
board
get
are
those
compelled by the school committee's
No.
decision as
No.
a possible safety
No.
issue?
Not
In
under-
fact,
not
in
under
fact, that's
statute.
exactly what we've
You
come,
have to start with your butter, is my
it's,
understanding.
if we say, if we
If you didn't do
reject,
anything.
that it starts, we abdicate all impact on the process.
Well, can we just agree then to just give us like a month?
Well,
Just
you have to talk
put
to
it
your
off to
butter.
the November meeting,
And
and
we-
just,
Right, we
Because-
talked to people on that street, and just so you know, they're not happy, not just that it's going in right over their houses, they are also bringing up their property values, they are bringing up the aesthetics, but they also, the access road has to go right by there, so they're bringing up more things, so the people don't want it there, it's just that this
But
person
just
did.
politically, just so you know, all of those issues are Medfield issues, and the parcel sits on a Dover piece of land.
but it's
that's-
going to affect Dover property.
property.
There's got to be some way those people can object
Well-
if they are going to be physically and actually
And,
affected.
and then also, them, I mean, from the one in Texas, the people in Texas, and the other ones that the people went and fought it, putting in something that it is, like, you're responsible for any kind of problems we have with our kids. Most likely, AT&T and all of them will not buy cell service on that, because now all of a sudden, because of the insurance, looking at it going, I don't want to insure that. I can't insure for this thing going up there and all those kids. Just so you guys know, I mean, my son has lupus, and he has on his doctor note from the doctor says, clear as day, stay away from all unnecessary EMFs. I just got that in June. And June, I wasn't even that aware of it. All of a sudden, I'm looking, going, it is going to become a diagnosis. It is going to become, people are going to know about it. But if the pediatrics, this is a pediatric doctor, says on my son's little, pediatric note, he's not supposed to be around it. I think that gives me a right to tell them, you know what, if he starts having headaches, and it's more than normal because of this cell tower, I will take it to that because, I do care that there's one only 600 feet. Though I don't know what this person thinks that he's not going to become, there is health effects after the fact because no insurance is going to want to take that. And I have no problem sending it to AT&T, whoever wants to buy the tower space. You can show them, here's a doctor's note. It's a prescription from a pediatric doctor, family doctor.
Maybe somebody should point out to the abutter that he might be subject to liability for
The
help.
question is,
If I
who's
may-
the somebody and who's gonna do it in time?
But no,
That's-
it's actually just looping back in though. I mean, the board has a responsibility, the planning board, not to make arbitrary capricious rules. That's where they can get flipped. And unfortunately, they can't base their decision on health.
All right.
So we're talking back again where there needs to be real change as far as getting the word out there, changing the legislation, and making this something that is more out in the public. I don't disagree with that at all. But the fact is, if I'm sitting in the seat of the planning board, what can I hang my hat on? And all these things about the insurance and people won't buy, I don't think that
What
they're
about
going to
the
be
Board of
considered
What
compelling.
about the boards of health in these towns? Shouldn't they be weighing in on this and telling the planning board to advise? I mean, you're telling me the planning board, in and of itself, doesn't have any concern about, the health of our kids?
My understanding is that the Board of Health does not have any kind of a power over the planning board. The planning board has an obligation to go by what the rubric is out there as far as the precedent, what they're allowed to look at. And they're not allowed to look at the health because that's what's written.
So I
So-
do think that
Unfortunately, you're in a hands-tied situation. I think Michael is right. I think that everybody is in a
Well, I disagree.
pressure
I
situation.
feel like my hands are tied.
But if
You're not tied, just have to go talk to your butter.
Well, there you go. Who
I
has
mean,
it
that's
as a
the
matter of
only,
right?
I mean, from my point of view, I'd love to see if the butter would back off for some period of time.
Has
to
anybody
get people-
tried that? Has anybody approached that?
I think that's what we're gonna do, is we're gonna work with the neighborhood that's directly there and see what kind of pressure we can.
Yes.
So I'm missing one thing, and that is that yes, Lori has, a note from her doctor that says her son should stay away from EMFs. But so it's not a health issue, but it is an education issue because if her son gets sick, then he can't go to school.
That's right. They're taking his ability to be in
So
school
what
away.
about the Board of Education? Or can't they help us in some way? Because it is an educational problem.
Well, and how much would it cost to educate him at home? Because that's what this
10
district would
days,
have to do.
And actually, as far as the disability, because in California, they're much more on top of this, and the reason is exactly that. The cell towers have been up earlier, they have smartphones. They turn off my parents' house air conditioner. They turn off their refrigerators based on these smart meters. They can turn off anything. All of a sudden, you're dying in their house. You're like, what's going on? They're like, they turn it off because you sign up for these programs. It's coming our way. I mean, they're trying to bring these things. It is an amazing thing to see how they got bulldozed over. And to opt out, they say like, oh, you can opt out. It's not that easy to opt out. You're on a waiting list to get it pulled back off. Because they put it in there without you knowing it, and now you've got to get this thing off, and you don't even know how, and you can't even touch the thing. So in California, they're just much more aware of this, but it is like there is a Disability Act that they're trying to bring forward in California because it seems like more people are EMF sensitive. I don't know if that's aware, are they more aware of their symptoms and then they've been able to diagnose it? I don't know, but there does seem to be a better movement for it.
But what I was just thinking is, what is it going to cost the school district if all of a sudden they have even 5 kids who cannot go to school in that school anymore, and they are responsible financially for educating those students? It's going to cost them way more. And can we go back to that abutter and sue him for that, for the money that's going to cost?
That's what you actually use against him, because the likelihood of getting 3% of 1,200 kids versus just 3% of a neighbourhood, you've got a greater chance of being slammed by a legal case at some point.
Well, ideally, I think we'd like to avoid that.
Yeah.
I mean, how
So
many
we
years
wanna
is
do
that
But
way?
that might be enough to kind of
Right,
convince him
to worry
to
them,
step back.
And that's what I'm talking about. I don't think we've exhausted all our possibilities in
No.
terms of.
I agree.
Or
getting
when
rid
does the Sherborn Tower go online, the farm pond one that could possibly?
That I have somebody checking into. I'm going to find out about that ASAP. So,
Litigation is still being settled. on that.
well, I heard it was pretty well settled.
Pretty close.
Yeah, pretty close. Yeah.
Well, it's close, but
Well, how far away could we get it? I mean, how come we never looked at that just because it was going to be taller? Is that something we could still put part of the thing, or is that?
it won't get 700 meters, depending on unless you can get onto other people's property. I mean, there's setback issues that get a while, but I mean, I'd like to see whether I don't know whether taller makes it, still the exposure goes up or not, but whether you can get the extra 200 or 300 feet and go to the back property line and get a waiver on the setbacks from the.
The height
Zoning.
affects the coverage.
It affects the coverage, but I don't know how it affects the exposures at the school, for example. Because when you look, I don't know whether to believe the modeling that they give when they make their proposal, but that model produces results that are not quite in line with just simply distance. But there is the implication that distance makes a difference. What?
They'll continue to go as high to affect the coverage pattern.
Yeah, I know, but I'm not sure what that means for something that's on the angle down to the school. What that actually means for that is something that's unclear. And it would be nice to know whether going further and taller still gets us a benefit, at least getting it. So instead of 300 meters, it's maybe 400 meters or whatever. I would argue.
Dana, Lori, we will work with you every day until that October meeting. We will do whatever we can. I'll spearhead whatever we can. I'll organize people. I'll get people. We can just to brainstorm even. Like we've already come up with a couple of ideas for how to.
We don't speak for the committee,
That's true.
and so
Right. I'm just telling you
I
that
cannot
I'm
tell you.
I just
I
want you-
can tell you that not everyone on the committee shares your beliefs. So.
I'm sure they don't.
We've been going through this process, just so that everyone knows, since May 21st. And I know that you guys are a little late to the party, and that's fine, but we've been talking about this for months. So I can't presuppose what will happen on October 7th.
Oh, no, and what I'm trying to communicate is we are happy to, to work together up until that October 7th even, just to brainstorm ideas. I mean, I feel like already, we've already gotten a couple of things thrown out that were pretty valid ideas. If we can get, a group of, like I said, intelligent, well-educated people in this community, I mean, I think we can come up with a lot of ideas, things
The
that we
thing
can
is,
do.
just we aren't allowed to, as a group, brainstorm. Because of open meeting laws, we can only debate and discuss in public. So it's hard for us to say that we can participate in informational sessions, but it's hard for us to, we cannot as a group sit down to brainstorm. We can only meet in public. So I'm happy to
No,
work,
that's fine, I'm not
but-
saying.
You can meet
yeah.
one or two of you can do it, or less than a quorum. couldn't
right,
you?
exactly.
So you can do that. I mean, I think.
But again, you're not gonna get necessarily, if you sit and talk to me, you won't necessarily get,
I would say the committee's fairly split, having gone to these meetings.
Right.
About this issue, and maybe, well, some could be educated. It's not clear they make a difference, I think, if you want to buy time. I mean, I'd like to be part of it, I'm full on, and I've spent a lot of time on this, but unless you bring something about dealing with the abutter to the school committee, I'd say, and whether it's the threats of the legal stuff or whatever it is, unless something is brought to the school committee regarding that neighborhood project, you're not going to get any, I'll be a little extreme and say you're probably going to get very little leeway in terms of them feeling flexible. And that's other people who maybe don't even fully agree. Maybe you could even, if you brought some leeway to them on time, maybe you get the others to be amenable even though they don't believe it. But I think without that kind of sense of leeway, I don't know why you're directing us from here. We're talking. Without some leeway from that side, I think they're going to feel uncomfortable. They're in a tough place.
Okay.
I mean, I'd like to see what
I think Pat was just notifying us that she's running out of battery or something, so.
It's all right.
I did want to just say one, if I may, just one real quick last thing, Pat. I think that the directive that the school committee gave, the last meeting that I was personally at, was that the school committee, please correct me, Dana and Laura if I'm wrong, the school committee was looking for greater parental involvement. So, I think today may have proven that. I hope tonight will prove it. And I hope on the 7th of October that we're looking for any parents, please, any parents that want to come, be a person at the meeting, sign a petition, email Mr. Bliss, Dana, and Laurie. We're just looking for full parental involvement.
just for full disclosure, since we've been talking about this in May, we've had less than 10 communications, and the majority of those have been in support. So
I will tell you that I was only aware of it because.
it's been an email blast
I know it
since
has, because I
then.
went back and I went through the website and everything, but May 21st, think about where everybody is May 21st, it's the end of school. And I'm not saying excuse, it's shame on me. But even Karen felt like at the June meeting that we would have time once, that you were basically just at the point where you were gonna be writing up a bid. When she came back to the September meeting, she was shocked that it was so far along. A lot was done over the summer. A lot of Sherborn and Dover residents are not here in the summer. Again, shame on them. They can keep tabs on things. They can pay attention. But we're all in 25 different directions, and there's a lot of things going on. So I'm not making excuses, but I am saying we're here now. We have tried to raise awareness now before anything final is signed. So, and I'm not convinced that there isn't something we can still do. And if the key thing here is to figure out how to deal with this abutter, if you want to work with us, let me know after the meeting. I'll take down your number. We can get together. I'm a firm believer in where there's a will, there's a way. If we have to get 100 people to pick at the abutter's house, I don't know. I'm throwing this out of the top of my head. But we can do this. We can do this. The Firefighters Association there were some firefighters that, this is an amazing thing. It was just like a couple fire stations away that were seeing health effects from cell towers on the property. The union, the Firefighters Association across the country, they are banned from firefighters. You cannot put a cell tower on a fire station property.
And there are pages and pages here of
And
the
it started with one
directive
person,
from
so-
the International Association of Firefighters to not put any cell tower or antenna on a fire station anywhere. No. They said no, and so are we.
How do we deal with Sherborn?
Could you just educate me? I'm very naive about this.
is the incentive of the abutter? Does it get paid?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What is it?
$25,000.
I didn't know.
So once you add cells,
So it's an ad sum or it's a
it's
monthly?
it's what they'll do, they'll sell
If you drive
spots
them,
on the tower, it could be up to,
25
so let's
bucks,
face it,
50% of the
like I heard the one in Sherman could garner $100,000, that's what they're looking at.
100
The one
grand
on-
all in, or
across
100
the
grand
front
a year, or?
$100,000 a year.
100 grand a year.
It's an annual, and the same with the school district.
I think the tape, we're gonna cut the tape. Thank you for everybody for coming.
Thank you.
There's so much.
Thank you, Raz.
Information so you can stay connected and power in numbers.